use during the presentation, which hopefully your participants can now see. So I'm really delighted to be asked to contribute to your webinar today and to be part of the Daphne network. I had a great couple of days the week before last in Brussels with Daphne, launching the Philanthropy Manifesto, which went extremely well, and we're very proud to be part of the network of colleagues working across Europe on important issues at this time. I'm just going to say something very briefly about ACF. We have 380 members across the UK. All of our members are themselves registered charities, so that means they are themselves required to comply with charity law and charity regulation. They are also grant makers as the principal way that they do their work. We have, as many of your members will, a variety of different kinds of foundations in our membership. The majority of them are family foundations. They have a board with either a living settler or a family descendant, and they fund across a huge variety of sectors, some of those listed on the screen. They will award grants as their principal way of delivering their funding, but also increasingly are looking at other kinds of funding practice, such as investments, and using their own voice is becoming an increasingly key part of what they do. So our members collectively hold about £3 billion, 3.2 billion euros of grants each year, and they hold about £50 billion of assets in investment. And what do we as ACF offer? These are some of our things. So because of the webinar today, I wanted to mention our European and global contribution through networks like Daphne, professional development program, about 200 events a year for our member representatives on different topics. We're increasingly offering thought leadership, which I'll come on to in terms of stronger foundations. Policy influence and engagement, we increasingly are working with our government to enable our members to have a voice, and for our government to be able to reach into the foundation sector and learn from its own expertise, and a variety of events and other outputs. So what is Stronger Foundations? Today I'm going to talk to you about several aspects of Stronger Foundations: where it has come from, how it works, our governance arrangements, the products that we are creating, and our story so far. The Stronger Foundations really began as a result of a member survey that we conducted nearly 3 years ago, where we asked our members what would they most like to see from ACF in the years ahead. And one of the strongest strands of that feedback was that they wanted ACF to be more proactive, more of a thought leader, and to bring challenging issues to our membership, to offer them an opportunity to work with their own peers between different foundations on difficult issues that affect their practice, and also to consider what it means to be an excellent foundation in the 21st century. The overarching aim of Stronger Foundations is to help grant-making foundations identify and pursue excellent practice. We want our members to be ambitious, effective, and expert. And we also want to help them make sure that they're using all of their assets, not just their grants budgets, to maximize their potential public benefit. There's some of the key questions we want to ask them, and for them to ask each other, is what is excellent foundation practice? How do we achieve it? How can we measure it? And what are the barriers? The way that we have gone about delivering this program is to establish, first of all, 6 working groups, each with a different theme, and that involves 90 of our foundation members through those working groups. We also have a number of other ways of engaging our members, principally through regional events across the UK, surveys, consultations, and specific offers for the boards of foundations rather than the staff, who tend to be the ones most involved in the working groups. Our members themselves chose the themes that they wanted to focus on across the working groups. So there is a group focusing on each one of these topics. The first one, looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, Juliana will speak about after me as a member of that group. We know that foundations, especially at board level, have a real problem with diversity. 99% of foundation trustees in the UK are white, and most are male. And we know that this is not a sustainable situation for our sector if we are to encourage others to become diverse, to become effective in the way they deliver public benefit. And we also, and many of our members feel, diversity is an essential ingredient in delivering effective practice. We are looking at impacted learning, and in particular, the various ways that foundations achieve impact in pursuit of their own charitable objectives. We will look at strategy and governance and ask the question, which comes first? Does your strategy come first and then you design your governance around it? Or, as is often the case for foundations, do you start with your board, appoint your trustees, and then decide what you want to focus on? We will look at transparency and how foundations are already opening up their grants data and sharing information about what they do, but thinking about, to whom are foundations accountable? Who should they be accountable to? Is it enough just to give your money away, or do you have to do more to prove that you're doing good? We will look at funding practices, not just grants, but also different kinds of investing strategies, social investment, venture philanthropy, and also look at whether processes help or harm our grantees. And lastly, we will look at intentional investing. We will ask the question, should foundations use their endowments to maximize their return in order to have a larger grants budget? Or should they in fact be using their endowments in pursuit of their mission? Is it right for a foundation to, on the one hand, invest in companies which are causing harm to society or to our climate, and on the other hand, using grants to mitigate some of those effects? So in terms of who is involved, we have our working groups, which involves 90 of our foundations. We have a board member from ACF, from our own board of trustees, represented on each group. We engage with a diverse range of regional networks of foundations across the UK, and some specific activity for Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, where we have less representation on the working groups. It's really important that this isn't just a conversation among foundations, but that actually most of the input comes from beyond our sector. So at our working group meetings, we involve expert representation from beyond the foundation community, such as from government, the private sector, charities receiving funding, as well as those who are critical of philanthropy and of foundation practice, who need to be also heard and their views considered. We also realise that the UK is only one place to look for good practice, and that there's a huge amount of expertise and excellence that exists beyond the UK, and we are very keen to ensure that international evidence is taken into account. So the working groups are tasked with examining, discussing and debating challenging questions about foundation practice. They will meet each 7 times over an 18-month period. 2 of them have nearly completed their work, and the other 4 are partway through currently. The meetings vary, but what's important is that it is ACF's board that is responsible for the delivery of this project. Our staff provide a secretariat for the groups, and a reference group will be formed at the end to ensure there is coherence between the different groups. The working groups are tasked with identifying a range of evidence and considering a broad range of views. They are not, and this is really important, they are not tasked with finding consensus. They do not have to agree, and they do not have to present one shared view. Rather, it will be ACF's job to interpret what they say and to come up with a set of recommendations for them to consider. My last two slides are about what the initiative aims to produce. We intend to produce a range of products, some of which we have already made available. Each group, for example, has its own microsite available to the public and to other colleagues with snapshot summaries of each meeting, further reading materials and presentations that were held in the meetings themselves. We have asked our members to produce provocation pieces. These are usually in the form of blogs, but take quite a provocative stance on any particular issue. This is intended to help generate conversation. We take a very comprehensive note of each meeting so that we have a record of what was said, and those will inform the end product of each working group, which will be a rapporteur report summarising the breadth of the discussion. In the future, we plan to produce a self-assessment tool for our foundation members so that they can see how far they still have to go before they can consider themselves excellent practice. This will likely take the shape of a menu of options based on real ways that foundations are already working. And it will inform the way that ACF conducts and delivers its development programme for foundation staff. One final product is the methodology itself. We have been so pleased with the level of engagement and the high demand for this project from our members that we don't think this project will end when these working groups have completed their task. Rather, this way of working may well become our main methodology for engaging our members in the years ahead. So I'll end with a few excerpts from some of the meetings so far. Some of these meetings have taken place at our office. Some of them have taken place at external organisations, within government, within other parts of the charity sector. And lastly, I will just show you one final piece of information, which is our website and also our Twitter feed. So we have a website, as I mentioned. This is available to the public. Each of the working groups has its own page, and I will just scan down to the bottom past the snapshot summaries, and you can see that we have video content from speakers, photographs and resources from each session, and at the very bottom of the page, further reading materials from beyond our own resources that we think would be very worth our members reading. And lastly, just to mention our use of social media, we've created a hashtag called Stronger Foundations, which is now being very well used by our members themselves. And as you'll see, as I scroll down, a variety of members from across the United Kingdom and in fact beyond are now using this hashtag to have their own conversations about what it means to be an excellent foundation. And this is proving to be a very useful way of enabling our members to discuss among themselves some of the ideas that are emerging from the working groups and beyond. So we are about a third of the way through this 2-year programme now, and we hope that by the autumn of this year, we will have produced the first rapporteur report from the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Working Group. And I'll stop there. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Max. Okay, so now we're handing over to Juliana. Takes a couple of seconds. Juliana, can you speak? Okay.
Yes, I think I'm unmuted now.
No, it works.
I'm just trying to find my presentation. Is the one. Would you have it there, Hannah, if I can't find it here?
Yes.
For some reason, it's not letting me share. Try again.
You can try it, or otherwise I can show it myself as well.
Oh, I think it's here now.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay.
Wait a second. I cannot see it yet. It probably takes a few seconds.
Okay. Tell me when you can see it and I'll start.
Juliana, would you try again? Or would you just open the presentation and then start sharing the screen again? Maybe it works better.
Okay, let me try again.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see it?
Yes.
You can.
Okay,
Great.
perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm just going to be talking to you for a few minutes about my experience as a member of the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Working Group. Just quickly wanted to tell you beforehand that I am working from home because my office is its open plan and we're moving, so we don't have enough quiet spaces there. And it's very quiet here, but I have a little dog who normally sleeps at this time of the day, but if she sees a cat in the garden, she might bark. So if you hear barking, this is the reason why. Just wanted to let you know beforehand. But my first slide, I think is frozen, Hannah, I'm afraid, the screen. Hannah?
Yes.
I think my screen is frozen. My slides are not moving.
Then let's switch maybe. So just stop sharing for a second.
Okay.
Okay, and I will share my screen then. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Not yet, but it's hopefully coming up.
Yeah, we've got
Yes.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
You have to move between the screens now, is that right?
Yes.
So if you could go to the next one,
Sure.
please. Okay, so the very first meeting, I think one of the first actions of the group was to rename ourselves, the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Working Group. The previous name of the group was Equality and Diversity. And I suppose the main reason why we decided to do that is because we decided that equality didn't really reflect the kind of discussions that we wanted to have as a group. Because equality treats everyone the same, and it assumes that everybody's starting from the same place and that the needs are the same. Equity, on the other hand, I suppose recognizes that we're all different and that we face different barriers. So it's about giving everyone what they need to succeed. And if we go to the next one. So we've had about 6 meetings so far. We have looked at a range of different issues amongst ourselves. We had a lot to share, but also we've had some really good speakers coming to share things with us. So some of the things we discussed includes, some practice from the US and how US foundations are putting equity into action. We have looked at social investment and how it can be more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive in its decision-making process. We looked at applying a racial justice lens to grant making. We looked at the importance of data and how to use it. We looked at how inclusive foundations are, or perhaps are not, in their approach to disability. And we also looked at some internal barriers that we may have as foundations, such as, for example, our recruitment policies. So the next slide. Okay, I just wanted to highlight meeting 4 that we have back in November, which looked at how foundations can take an inclusive approach to grant making. And we had Isn't and Giving coming to speak to us. They brought 2 young people from their Young Grant Makers program to talk about their experience of being part of that. So the program was about having young people make decisions about where the money goes to young people, to benefit young people in the London Borough of Islington. So they recruited the young people through a local youth organization. They trained them in grant making practice. After they were trained, they were then delegated £80,000 by the board, and they were tasked with promoting the grants program and then managing the whole application process and then making the decisions about the funding. And it was really interesting to hear about how challenging they found making those final decisions, but also about all the learning that they had during that process. And if you move to the next slide, please, Hannah, you will see a picture of the 2 participants in the middle that came to speak to us. And it was really interesting as well to hear some insights from the director of the program, the person on the left, and how much they benefited by becoming much more inclusive in that way. And just so you know, the person on the right is the chair of our working group. Okay, we can go to the next picture. So I guess, what does it all mean so far? I suppose for me personally, I'm already, very much committed to these values, I suppose, both in a personal and a professional level. So I have a lot of experience working in the social justice field, particularly in the women's rights and migrants' rights fields. I also grew up in a very unequal society. I grew up in Brazil. I was born and grew up there. And when I was a student there, I volunteered with street children. So I've got this values very much deep rooted in myself. However, it's been fascinating to be part of this project, and I've learned a lot, and it has added a lot of value to myself. As an organization, again, the Migration Foundation, already embedded some of these values. We believe, for example, that's very important to have the voices of those who we are trying to help as part of the decision-making process. So, for example, our grants committee, where we make the final decisions about our grants, is represented by a quite diverse group of people. But we also have people in the committee with lived experience, and we find that very valuable. And I think our decision-making process is probably better as a result of having those views as part of the group. And also, the Migration Foundation, like Hannah said earlier on, is part of a large housing association, Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing. And as a housing association, we already think about these issues. So, for example, we have a diversity lead who works across all the different programs. We have been recognized as a good employer for LGBTI people. And we have a number of initiatives to tackle barriers for people so that they can progress. But, I think there's a recognition that we can go much, much further than this. And I think it's been really useful being able to make these reflections as part of this working group as well. For the working group itself, I left a question mark because, I can't speak for everyone. However, I think it's, the people in the group have a lot of experience amongst themselves. And I think we've been able to exchange a lot of learning, useful information. And I think people have found the process valuable. I think we're all a little bit puzzled about the next steps. So if Hannah could go to the next slide, please, which is, where do we go from here and what do we do with all this information? I suppose we feel a little bit of a sense of responsibility for all these things that we have been discussing and then the impact of it all. So if Hannah could go to the next one. Sorry, Hannah. just some final reflections. I think that the sector, it's clear from all the research that we have had to date that the sector needs to change. As Max said earlier on, the diversity amongst trustees and senior managers in the charity sector in general, not just trusts and foundations, shows very little progress. I think that the moral case for greater diversity and inclusion is also clear. I think at the very least is a commitment to social justice. But I would go much further than that. I think that foundations are often trying to tackle very complex social issues and to improve the way that we make decisions. I think it's really important to have those who are usually affected by those complex issues as part of the decision-making process. So I think that's it's a very important point. I think the working group is already comprised of like-minded people. I think broadly speaking, we share some similar values. And the challenge for us is, where do we go from here, and how can we bring other people along with us, especially those who may not be thinking about these issues yet. But I think overall it's been a really positive experience so far, and I'm really pleased that ACF is taking the lead on this. The challenge, I guess, for ACF is, how are we going to see change and what's the impact of all this? And I had a final slide, but I'm not sure if Hannah has this final slide.
Yes.
You do, which is a picture. Yeah, that's right. That's the one. So I just wanted to end on a positive note, because I think it's really important to recognize that, there has been a lot of positive change to date as a result of collective action, across the world. And so I think we need to honor that and really celebrate that, even though, there's still a long way to go. So I just wanted to finish with a quote by Rosa Parks. And if you can't see the picture now, I'll just read it to you. She said, "To bring about change, you must not be afraid to take the first step. We will fail when we fail to try." And I'll stop here. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand it over to Hannah. Thanks for your support there, Hannah.
Excellent, Juliana. Thank you so much. Thank you for a very personal also perspective on Stronger Foundations and how you contribute. It's absolutely amazing. So now we have time for questions. I will stop sharing my screen. Please use the Q&A box if there are any questions, and Max and Juliana will be happy to answer your questions. Just raise your hand or write a question in the Q&A box. So Max von Abendbrot, our Executive Director of Daphne, would like to ask a question. Wait a second. Okay, Max, I unmuted you, so you're please feel welcome to ask the question.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for both of you, Juliana and Max, for the very interesting insights into this project. Looking forward to hear more as you go. My question to both of you is, do you think that an international dimension would add value to the work that you are doing? And I would like really to ask the question to both of you, because on the one hand side, Juliana being a representative of a foundation and very much involved in one working group, you might have a slightly different perspective compared to Max as a secretariat of this Stronger Foundations project. Thank you.
Thank you, Max.
Max,
Juliana, do you want to go first, or should I say something?
if you want to say something from an ACF perspective, yeah, and then I can.
Yeah, very briefly then. I think it's really important, in fact, it's essential that we take account of knowledge and expertise beyond the United Kingdom. We would be very limited, and I think constrained by what we already know from UK practice. There are some fantastic examples of practice elsewhere, and also examples of very progressive foundations that have gone a lot further than many in the UK. So we'd really welcome that opportunity. we have an international funders network within ACF of members who fund outside of the UK, and they have chosen to use some of the themes from Stronger Foundations for their meetings this year. So we will be taking account of the perspective of UK-based foundations funding outside of the UK. That's a slightly different question, I think, to the one Max posed. So far, we have had quite a lot of international evidence contributed to our working groups. However, those have mostly been so far from North America, and I would very much welcome the opportunity to hear from colleagues in Europe about examples of good practice that they would like to share, and would be very pleased to facilitate that.
Yeah, the same here. I think, having an international perspective is very important. I suppose I already bring my own sort of international perspective as a Brazilian who lives in the UK, who works with a number of different communities here. But, definitely would be really interested in sharing with others and learning from others from other parts of the world as well. So, yes.
I'd like to continue with the question myself. Actually, when I was reading about Stronger Foundations on the website of ACF, I saw the blog post by Gina Crane. She wrote about why do funders do so much learning in isolation. Such a fantastic, interesting title she chose, and where she was sharing her thinking about this and asking herself, why is this actually so? At the same time, we can see that funders and associations are trying to overcome this challenge. Like Swiss foundations are organizing a symposium this year in May, and the name of the Congress is Beyond the Comfort Zone. So they're trying to face new challenges. So from your perspective, is there a trend that foundations, philanthropy support organizations are trying to get together, that they realize that they can do much more together and can achieve much more together? What is your experience here?
I think we've seen a lot of appetite to work and think collaboratively through this process. For some of our members, this is the first time they've been involved in a cross-sector initiative, and I think they are encouraged and can see a way they can play a role. One of the best outcomes from that has been that some of our smaller foundation members have said that they felt this has been a way for their voices to be heard on a level with some of the largest foundations in the UK, that this has been an equalising process where everyone's view is valid and no one's view is more valid than someone else's. And that sense of hierarchy based on grant spending power, I think, has been mitigated through this process, which has been very helpful. More generally, within the foundation sector in the UK, we don't see as much collaboration through joint funding or through sharing practices as we might like, or as our members themselves would like. It is complex and time consuming, but I think there is growing recognition that more can be done if we do it collectively. One of the ways that that is starting to happen is through collective voice. There is more appetite and more effort being put in by foundations to speak with one voice, either to government or on behalf of the communities that they represent and support. And I think more and more foundations are starting to recognise that they have a real asset available to them in how they use their voice, and that the choice to be silent can't be seen as neutral. That silence is, of course, an option for all foundations, and it might be the most appropriate choice for them. But it's a strategic choice, just as using any other of your assets would be. And many foundations are seeing real value in working together and spreading perhaps the risk of speaking out on certain issues across a wider group than if they said it on their own.
Excellent. Juliana, would you like to add something on that?
Just very briefly to say that, from my experience, foundations working with immigration issues of course with exceptions, tend to be very collaborative and work in a very collaborative way, because we're trying to tackle extremely difficult, complex issues, and we recognize that by joint effort we can achieve a lot more. So as a foundation, we do fund a lot of initiatives alongside other funders. We are currently considering, with other funders in the sector, improving leadership skills of those working in the migration field, and we're doing that in a very collective way. So I think it's really important to have a collaborative approach when you're trying to tackle very difficult things.
Thank you both. We have Beate Eckhardt from Swiss Foundations. She would like to ask a question, and then we would have James McGowan and Max from Abendbrot had another question. So Beate?
Yes, hello everybody. Many thanks to Juliana and Max. It's really it's an exciting exercise you did, and it can be very inspirational for sure for Swiss Foundations as well. I have some questions when it comes to the composition of the working groups. I have 3 concrete questions. First of all, is there a maximum number of participants where you say when that's overachieved, the group will be difficult to handle and to work? The second one, you answered it a little bit already, Max, but was it also possible to engage smaller foundations? And the third question would be, and also combined with the composition of the group, was there ever a tension when it comes to the experience and the competence of the different participants? Was it always easy to deal that there were maybe foundations in a working group which, are nearly experts, and some others which are newcomers to the questions, and how you dealt with this kind, I imagine, a little bit tension?
Thank you. Those are really fantastic questions. In terms of the number of the group, when we launched the first 2 working groups last year, we've been launching them in pairs, so they're at different stages. The first 2 were launched with 12 members, and we found actually, because when it comes to the meetings, sometimes a couple of people can't make it, we found 12 wasn't quite enough. So the other groups have up to 16 members in each group, and that has proved to be a very good number, because on the day usually there are between 12 and 15 that will be able to attend. So that has been the number that we feel has worked well. In terms of smaller foundations, we were very keen that smaller foundations were represented. We have a smaller funders network separately to this initiative, who we engaged early on. But actually, we didn't find any difficulty recruiting representatives from smaller foundations. We've ended up with a very good cross-section of different sizes of foundations. The area where we didn't do so well was on regional variation across the UK. We have tended to have, in the southeast of England and in London, that is where most of our members generally are based, but we've actually got slightly more representation from there. And it's been logistically challenging to enable members from much further afield to take part in the working groups. So we have decided we need to go out to them, and we need to find as many ways as possible to ensure that the voices of foundations that are based in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland and other parts of the United Kingdom are heard from. So we have some regional variation, but not as much as we would like, and not as much as we need. And lastly, on the question of experience and competence, one of the advantages of the working groups is that people have chosen to join these particular working groups. So they have opted in to each working group, and an advantage of that is that they, in almost all cases, I think, would recognise that they themselves are experts to an extent in those areas. There is some variation within that which they have put forward, but they are all enthusiasts about the topics that they have selected. The downside to that is that they don't necessarily represent a cross-section of our membership. So as Juliana rightly said, with the diversity group, there is a lot of shared opinion, a lot of energy, and a lot of willingness to try and seek change. That is not necessarily representative of the membership as a whole. And one of the biggest challenges will be how we ensure that the messages coming from the working groups can be heard and listened to by the sector as a whole, and not just seen as the views of people who are at the most progressive or hard-hitting end of the spectrum.
Thank you, Max. Juliana?
I don't think I've got anything to share, apart from, even though we are quite like-minded people, you know, we have had we've had to challenge one another as well on some occasions. So that's been very, very interesting. And it feels like a space that's kind of safe enough to be able to do that and have those difficult discussions. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, then I'll hand over to James. James, you must be on now.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, Juliana, for the presentations. Yeah, I have a question, Max. You said that you saw this as a methodology that you know, you might continue with an approach to a way of working, and I'd be interested two things in relation to that. One is, what is absolutely distinctly different about the approach, rather than an affinity group or a thematic interest group that is run by members and for members, where they could equally invite external presenters, they could engage with people in whatever way they wanted. When I read about this, what I saw of it was, what made it distinctly different was that it was sort of new and different, and if it is continued, will that aspect of the innovation and the time limited dimension that was clearly set out be lost? How will you maintain the interest? That's one question. And then the second one is there anything that's distinctly different? Again, you touched on this, about working with staff members as opposed to board members, and what evidence has come out so far in the Stronger Foundations initiative.
Thanks, James. I think one of the things that's different is the scale of the initiative. It's certainly different to anything we've attempted before, where we have such a large number and also such a broad range of foundations involved in a collective effort, not to look at a thematic issue per se, but to pursue this idea of what does it mean to be a highly effective and excellent foundation in the 21st century. That sense of collective endeavour, that we're in this together, that we're doing it, of course, for the benefit of those we fund, but also to ensure that our sector as a whole is fit for purpose and is going to be one that remains so in the next century. I think those are some of the unique features of it, the scale and the remit. The other thing is that, unlike many working groups or learning networks, we are not asking for them to find a consensus necessarily, although it turns out lots of consensus is being found, but rather we want to hear the breadth of views and experiences. And I think that is certainly, compared to initiatives that I have been involved in when I worked for a foundation, that has been a distinct feature, I think. In terms of the board representation and staff representation, it is the case that the majority of the people involved in the working groups are staff members, but we do have probably about one fifth of those involved in the working groups across the 6 groups are trustees or chairs of foundations. That's particularly true in the strategy and governance working group, which is in part about the boards of foundations. And so we feel that that's a reasonable start, but we have plans for the year ahead in terms of how to engage chairs of foundations and trustees, because ultimately they are the highest level in terms of decision making within foundations, and ultimately staff work for the board. So it's really important that this isn't also seen just as an initiative led by a group of staff members, but also that it takes account of the views of trustees and also living benefactors who have given their own or their family's money to the cause, that they also are heard from, and therefore that the products that we create in the future resonate and are useful to them as well as the staff teams.
Thank you, Max. Juliana, do you have?
I don't think I've got anything to add. No, I think those are very specific for ACF.
Okay, what I really liked about Stronger Foundations is just that this initiative seeks to engage not only the foundation sector, the very broad range of charities and foundations, but also external actors. So could you please comment on that? How do you do that? Engaging with media, journalists, with politicians, policymakers? What is your experience here and what is the benefit?
Juliana, I don't know if you wanted to mention the session we had with the race disparity unit from the government. You were at that
That's
session.
the one session, Max, that I missed, I'm afraid.
No problem. I'll briefly speak about that session, which was one of the diversity working group sessions. We wanted to look at the issue of change driven by data, and to help us with that discussion, we invited the director of the government's race disparity unit, which is a special unit set up by the Prime Minister, because she was concerned that government departments were creating different outcomes for people depending on their race. And he spoke to the group about how his unit is requiring every government department to report on its outcomes in terms of racial disparity. And that helped our group think through what would it mean for foundations to have to report on their outcomes by racial disparity. Do we know whether we are creating any sorts of racial or gender disparities, for example, through our grant making? Are we in fact prioritizing certain groups over others? Are we distributing our funds fairly and evenly across different communities? And if we're not, then we should perhaps pose the question that the race disparity unit poses to government departments, which is explain or change. So they ask every government department that has a disparity based on race to explain their disparity, set out what the reasons are behind these differences of outcomes for people depending on their race. And if they can't explain it, then they need to change what they're doing and address the imbalance. So what we try and do with our external speakers is hear from a variety of perspectives, from government, from the private sector and elsewhere, and then apply that back to the foundation context and say, what would this mean for foundations if this were to be applied to us?
Excellent, Max, thank you. Juliana, would you like to jump in, or shall we continue with the next question? Finally, it's okay. You can unmute yourself.
Sorry, I warned you. No, I think that session that Max talked about was the example, but unfortunately that was on my birthday, and I had to miss that one. So. But we, the perspectives that we have had and the speakers that we have had have been coming from different places, and that's been really interesting, especially, from, it would be really good, I suppose, to hear from places outside the US. I think we've been quite US focused, and Max did mention that. Perhaps the next step would be to go beyond that and have a look at examples from Europe and even beyond. Would be a recommendation.
Absolutely, I think it's true for many countries in Europe. The US bias that we have The next question is from Max van Amport. So he's asking you, what would you do differently in setting up the program again and running it if you're starting like from scratch? So what can we learn from your first month of experience in engaging with members around this project?
I think I'd be very interested to hear Juliana's thought from the group that she's been involved in. I think we were very keen that this initiative was member-led in terms of identifying the themes. I think what we could have done more quickly is establish the terms of reference for the groups. When the first two groups started, we were using them in a way as a pilot project to test different ways of working, different methodologies. And that has really benefited the groups that have subsequently been launched because they've had a very clear terms of reference to work from. But the first two groups didn't have that in place from the beginning. And I think that meant they were a little bit unsettled, or more unsettled than they might have been, in terms of what they were there to achieve, what their purpose was, what the products would be. I think the other thing is, at ACF, we have become more confident in the methodology that we've been using as time has gone on. And as we've done more and more groups and facilitated more discussion, we've started to really see the benefits coming through. And if we were to run it again, I think we would be able to go into it with a lot more confidence that this was a useful methodology.
Perfect. Juliana, I think your perspective is also very valuable here.
Yeah, no, I think we were one of the first groups, right? Because we are finishing soon. So I think we've got one or maybe two more meetings. Yeah, I suppose being more clear about the purpose and how we're going to get there. I mean, I know that we are still thinking about that and what kind of products are we going to be developing, if any, you know, are we going to be developing to then disseminate the information further. We've talked about toolkits, we've talked about manifestos, we've talked about lots of different things, different ideas. But maybe having a more of a clear idea from the beginning would have helped us to structure things better. I think we were one of the groups that maybe didn't have enough people, because I think some people have gone on maternity leave, and I think last meeting wasn't as well attended as previous meetings. So I think the numbers have dropped a little bit. So I agree with Max, maybe recruiting more would have been better. And I don't know, I think we've maybe having more opportunities to, or maybe at some point having an opportunity to come together in an informal setting and just, I don't know, have a drink or something, you know, just to share more perspectives in an informal way would be interesting as well. But that's something that we can still maybe do at the end, you know, to kind of celebrate all the meetings that we have had. But I think overall it's been fascinating, actually. It has been a really good experience. I think the group has really bonded and challenged one another as well.
Yeah, just one comment I'd add, if I may. I really liked things that Juliana said. There's some really useful ideas there. One other thing that I think we could have done better, and we still have an opportunity to do this in some of the groups, is provide a way for other members who haven't been involved previously to become involved in the initiative, and in particular with the working groups. It's a challenge because on the one hand you want consistency in terms of who's involved, and you want that sense of camaraderie and team spirit to emerge and build, as Juliana's mentioned. But as the groups have become further down the line, they've become better known, the work is starting to be heard about and talked about. Other members have said, how can we get involved? We're really interested in diversity or in transparency. And we haven't had a ready-made offer for them to get involved in that way. So we're working on that now. I think if we were doing it again in response to James's original question, we would build in some sort of mechanism from the beginning so that further down the line there was a way for other people to become involved.
So that's still a process, a learning process also for you. And I'm getting feedback from colleagues from Switzerland, from Poland, from Juliana, from Polish Donors Forum, who say that they largely benefited from Stronger Foundations initiative and from the experiences you shared today. So we have new ideas of how to develop their associations. So thank you so much. It's absolutely amazing, and we still have access to Stronger Foundations at the website. So you're great at sharing your knowledge with us, and we'll be happy to read new blog posts and new information. Thank you everyone for participating in the webinar. I just shared a SurveyMonkey link, so please feel free to share your feedback with us so that we can learn for next time, and we can improve and also pick up topics that are of interest to you. So thank you so much, and thank you, James and Juliana. Excellent presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.